My name is Elena Morgan. I'm 42 and I watched my own funeral from the back of the chapel while my family fought over my estate. The irony wasn't lost on me. There I sat in my dress blues, 23 years of service ribbons gleaming on my chest, listening to my sister Emma deliver a eulogy about how I never amounted to much and wasted my life playing soldier. She stood at the podium, dabbing fake tears with a tissue, telling 200 mourners how she'd tried so hard to help her troubled little sister find direction in life. Elena was always searching for purpose, Emma said, her voice carrying that practiced tone of concerned superiority she'd perfected over the years. She bounced from job to job in the military, never settling down, never building anything real. I just wish she could have found the stability and success that comes with a normal life. I almost laughed. Almost. The chapel was packed, standing room only. Emma had attributed the turnout to the community's sympathy for our family's loss, but I knew better. These people weren't here for sympathy. Half of them were current and former military personnel, intelligence officers, Pentagon officials, and State Department liaisons. The other half were foreign dignitaries and government officials whose lives I'd impacted in ways Emma couldn't begin to imagine. But Emma didn't recognize any of them. To her, they were just faces filling seats, validating her narrative that even in death, I'd managed to inconvenience everyone by requiring such a large venue. The whole charade had started 6 months earlier when my unit went dark during a classified operation in Eastern Europe. Officially, we were presumed dead. Our families were notified, death certificates were processed, and memorial services were planned. Standard protocol for deep cover operations that required complete separation from our former identities. What wasn't standard was coming home to discover your family had already divided up your belongings and were planning to contest your will. I'd returned to American soil 3 days ago, debriefed at Langley for 48 hours, and received my next assignment, a promotion to full colonel and command of a new joint task force. But before I could report to my new post, I had to attend my own funeral. Protocol demanded it. I needed to see how classified information was being handled by civilians, assess any security risks, and determine if my cover had been compromised. So there I sat, in the back pew of St. Michael's Chapel, watching my family perform grief they didn't feel over a sister they'd never understood. Emma continued her performance. Elena was always so stubborn, so determined to prove something to everyone. She couldn't understand that some of us were happy with simpler lives. She couldn't see that her constant need to be important, to be special, just made her seem desperate. Our mother, Helen, nodded sadly from the front row. She'd flown in from Arizona, where she'd been telling her retirement community friends about her daughter who played Army and never gave her grandchildren. She'd brought photo albums, but every picture she'd chosen showed me in civilian clothes, family barbecues, Christmas mornings, college graduation. She'd deliberately excluded any photos of me in uniform, as if my career were something embarrassing to be hidden. My brother David sat beside her, checking his phone periodically. He'd taken bereavement leave from his job at the insurance company, though I suspected his grief was more about the inconvenience of travel than actual loss. David had always been Emma's ally in family dynamics, united in their belief that I was the odd one out, the one who never learned to be normal. The three of them had spent my presumed death efficiently dismantling my life. They'd cleaned out my apartment, donated my books, sold my furniture, and threw away what they deemed military junk. Those items included commendations, photos with foreign ministers, and letters of appreciation from refugee families I'd helped evacuate. Emma had kept only what she considered valuable, my grandmother's jewelry, which had been left to me specifically. They'd also attempted to access my bank accounts and investment portfolios, only to discover they were blocked by federal privacy laws. Emma had hired a lawyer to challenge this, arguing that as next of kin, she had a right to know about my mysterious finances. She'd spent weeks creating a narrative about how I'd probably gotten involved in something shady overseas, how she needed to protect the family name from whatever trouble I'd gotten myself into. The truth was simpler and more complicated than she could imagine. I'd spent the last 23 years building a career that spanned multiple agencies and classified programs. I'd started as a second lieutenant in Army intelligence, earned my doctorate in international relations during my off-duty hours, and gradually moved into roles that required deeper cover and higher clearances. My personnel file was compartmentalized across so many agencies that most of my colleagues only knew fragments of my actual portfolio. I'd coordinated refugee evacuations from 3 different war zones, I'd negotiated prisoner exchanges with hostile governments, I'd testified before closed Senate committees about emerging security threats, I'd trained foreign intelligence officers and lectured at the War College. My work had contributed to peace treaties, prevented international incidents, and saved lives in ways that would never be publicly acknowledged. But to my family, I was just Alina, their aimless little sister who'd never figured out how to be normal. Emma finished her eulogy with what she clearly considered a touching conclusion. I just hope that wherever Elena is now, she's finally found the peace and purpose she was always searching for, and I hope she knows that despite all our differences, we loved her exactly as she was, flaws and all. The congregation murmured approval, but I noticed something Emma didn't. In the middle section, a man in a dark suit stood up and walked toward the exit, then another, and another. Within moments, a steady stream of attendees were quietly leaving the chapel. These weren't people walking out on Emma's eulogy. These were people responding to discrete signals, coordinated movements that indicated a change in operational status. Someone had just received word that the memorial service was concluding and it was time for the real ceremony to begin. Emma noticed the exodus and looked hurt. I guess I suppose people have other commitments, she said, trying to maintain her composure. The pastor, Father Mitchell, stepped forward to offer closing remarks, but before he could speak, the chapel doors opened again. A formation of soldiers in dress blues entered, led by a brigadier general I recognized as my former commanding officer from the Pentagon. Emma's face went pale. This wasn't part of the program she'd planned. General Morrison approached the podium with the measured precision of someone accustomed to command. He was followed by 6 other officers, each carrying ceremonial items, a folded American flag, a display case with military decorations, and what I recognized as a presidential unit citation. Ladies and gentlemen, General Morrison's voice carried the authority of 3 decades in uniform. We're here today to honor Lieutenant Colonel Alina Morgan, whose service to this nation spanned multiple agencies and classified operations that cannot be fully detailed in this public setting. I watched Emma's face as the word Lieutenant Colonel sank in. She'd spent years telling people I was just a sergeant, a low-ranking soldier who pushed papers and followed orders. The idea that I'd been an officer, and a senior one, was clearly something she'd never considered. Colonel Morgan's final assignment, General Morrison continued, required her to assume a cover identity that necessitated complete separation from family and previous associations. Her presumed death was part of an operation that has now been successfully concluded. The murmur that went through the chapel was audible. Emma looked around in confusion, as if she'd walked into someone else's ceremony by mistake. Colonel Morgan's service record includes 3 Bronze Stars, the Defense Meritorious Service Medal, the Joint Service Commendation Medal, and decorations from 6 allied nations for her work in international security and humanitarian operations. David leaned forward in his seat, his phone forgotten. Mother sat perfectly still, her mouth slightly open. General Morrison gestured toward the back of the chapel. Colonel Morgan requested permission to attend this service in honor of the family that raised her and to personally receive her next assignment. Every head in the chapel turned toward the back pews. I stood up slowly, my dress blue uniform crisp and perfectly fitted, 23 years of ribbons and decorations displayed across my chest. The silence was complete. I walked down the center aisle with the measured pace of someone who'd done this hundreds of times before, in ceremonies far more dangerous and far more important than this one. My family stared as if they were seeing a ghost, which, in a way, they were. When I reached the front of the chapel, General Morrison extended his hand. Colonel Morgan, congratulations on the successful completion of Operation Silent Guardian. You are hereby promoted to the rank of full colonel and assigned command of the Joint International Security Task Force. He handed me a folder containing orders that carried classifications my family didn't have clearance to understand. The same sister who'd been dividing up my belongings and planning to contest my will was now staring up at me with an expression I'd never seen before, complete bewilderment mixed with something that might have been respect. "Thank you, General," I replied, my voice steady and professional. "I'm honored to serve." The ceremony that followed was brief but formal. The flag was presented, the citations were read, and photographs were taken with officials whose names would mean nothing to Emma, but whose handshakes represented years of professional relationships she'd never known existed. When the military portion concluded, the chapel began to empty again. The dignitaries, the foreign officers, the Pentagon officials, they all filed out with the same quiet efficiency they'd shown arriving. They had other commitments, other ceremonies, other classified obligations that didn't require explanation to civilian families. Soon, only my immediate family remained in the front pews, along with a few family friends who looked as stunned as Emma, David, and Mother. I approached them slowly, my heels clicking on the marble floor of the chapel. "Hello, Emma," I said quietly. "Thank you for the lovely eulogy." She opened her mouth, but no words came out. For the first time in our adult lives, my sister was speechless. "Colonel?" Mother's voice was barely a whisper. "Elena, I don't understand. What just happened? Who were all those people?" I sat down in the pew beside her, my uniform making soft rustling sounds as I moved. "Those were my colleagues, Mother, people I've worked with for the past 23 years. "But you never told us," David began. "I couldn't tell you," I interrupted gently. "Most of my work required security clearances that prohibited discussing details with family members. I know that was difficult to understand." Emma finally found her voice. "But we thought, you never seemed to, we didn't know you were important." The word hung in the air between us, important, as if importance were something visible, something that announced itself at family gatherings and holiday dinners. "I was never trying to seem important, Emma. I was trying to do work that mattered." "But why didn't you tell us about the promotions, the medals? We could have been proud of you." I looked at her carefully, remembering 23 years of phone calls where she'd interrupted my attempts to share good news with complaints about her own life. Conversations where she dismissed my deployment stories as Elena trying to sound interesting again. Family gatherings where she'd introduced me to her friends as my sister who's still playing soldier. "I tried to tell you," I said simply. "You weren't interested in listening." The silence stretched uncomfortably. Father Mitchell had discreetly withdrawn to give us privacy, and the chapel felt enormous around our small group. "What happens now?" Mother asked. "Now I report to my new assignment. I'll be based in Washington, but I'll travel frequently. The work is still classified, but I can tell you it involves coordinating security efforts with allied nations." Emma was staring at my uniform, as if she were seeing it clearly for the first time. "Elena, I'm sorry. I had no idea you were, we didn't know you had achieved so much." "I know. Can you forgive us for not understanding? For what we said about you?" I considered the question carefully. 23 years of feeling like an outsider in my own family. 2 decades of having my career dismissed as a phase, my service minimized as an inability to settle down and be normal. Years of listening to Emma tell people that she was the successful one because she'd gotten married and had children, while I was still searching for purpose. But I also thought about the work I'd done in those years, the families I'd helped reunite across war-torn borders, the young officers I'd mentored, the international crises that had been quietly resolved through patient negotiation and careful intelligence work, the refugee children who were alive today because of operations I'd planned and executed. "There's nothing to forgive," I said finally. "You couldn't understand what you didn't know about." Emma looked relieved, but I wasn't finished. "However," I continued, "going forward, I need you to understand something. My work matters. It has always mattered. The fact that I couldn't talk about it didn't make it less important or less real. I need you to respect that, even if you don't understand the details." She nodded quickly. "Of course, absolutely." Mother reached over and took my hand. "Elena, I'm proud of you. I should have said that more often." "Thank you." David cleared his throat. "So, about your apartment, we may have donated some things." I smiled, the first genuine smile I'd felt all day. "It's fine, David. I didn't need any of that stuff anyway. My new position comes with housing and all the equipment I need." "But your grandmother's jewelry, Emma has it, and we know it was supposed to go to you." "Keep it," I said, looking at Emma. "Grandmother would want it to go to someone who would appreciate it." Emma's eyes filled with tears, real ones this time. "Elena, I can't keep it. It's yours. She left it to you specifically." "She left it to me because she thought I needed something to remember her by. But I have 23 years of memories of serving the country she and grandfather loved. That's a better inheritance than jewelry. The conversation continued for another hour, covering logistics and explanations and awkward attempts at reconciliation. They asked questions I could answer and questions I couldn't. They apologized for things that mattered and things that didn't. They promised to do better, to be more supportive, to try to understand. I listened and responded appropriately, but part of me was already thinking about my next assignment, the briefing tomorrow morning, the team I'd be assembling, the international partners I'd need to coordinate with. This chapel, this ceremony, this family drama, it was already becoming part of my past, filed away like every other mission I'd completed. When we finally said our goodbyes, Emma hugged me tightly. "I love you, Elena. I'm sorry it took something like this for me to really see you." "I love you too," I replied, and meant it. But as I walked out of St. Michael's Chapel and toward the government sedan waiting to take me to my next briefing, I realized something profound had shifted. For 23 years, I'd carried the weight of my family's disapproval, their inability to understand or value my choices. I'd let their dismissal of my career create a small, persistent doubt about my own worth. Now, standing in my dress blues with a promotion to full colonel and command of an international task force, I understood that their approval had never been necessary. Their understanding had never been required. Their respect, while welcome, wasn't essential to my sense of purpose or accomplishment. I had spent 2 decades protecting people who would never know my name, serving a mission larger than family dynamics or personal recognition. I had built a career based on competence, integrity, and service to something greater than myself. My family's inability to see that had been their limitation, not mine. As the sedan pulled away from the chapel, I opened the folder containing my new orders. The mission briefing was classified at levels that required specialized facilities to discuss. The team I'd be commanding included officers from 6 allied nations. The scope of responsibilities spanned 3 continents and involved coordination with agencies most people had never heard of. It was exactly the kind of work I'd been training for my entire career. My phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "I Googled your medals. I had no idea. I'm so proud to be your sister." I smiled and put the phone away without responding. There would be time for family later, after I'd settled into the new position and determined what information I could safely share with civilians. For now, I had work to do, important work that mattered in ways Emma was just beginning to understand. The sedan turned toward Pentagon City, and I opened my laptop to review the initial briefing materials for tomorrow's meeting. Colonel Elena Morgan reporting for duty, as I had every day for the past 23 years. The difference was that now, finally, I was reporting for duty without carrying the weight of trying to prove my worth to people who had never been qualified to judge it in the first place.